8 days from now, a deadline expires that no one in the world can afford to ignore. President Trump has told Iran, reopen the Strait of Hormuz to all shipping, or the United States military will destroy your power grid, starting, in Trump's own words, with the biggest plant first. Iran has answered that if so much as one American bomb falls on Iranian power infrastructure, Tehran will mine every navigable waterway in the Persian Gulf, not just the Strait of Hormuz, but the entire body of water that connects the global energy system to the rest of the world. We are not talking about an inconvenience. We are talking about plunging a nation of 90 million people into darkness while simultaneously cutting the drinking water supply to 5 Gulf nations whose populations have no other source. This is April 6th, a date that has been set, postponed, reset, and now sits 8 days away like a loaded question that the entire world is waiting on someone to answer.
This war began on February 28th, when the United States and Israel launched a joint military operation against Iran under the name Operation Epic Fury. The campaign was massive in scale and immediate in consequence. Within hours of the first strikes, Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei was killed. Within days, Iran had launched retaliatory waves of ballistic missiles and drones at U.S. military bases across the Gulf, at Israel, and at the energy infrastructure of every Gulf nation it accused of hosting American forces. Within a week, the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway through which roughly 20% of the world's oil and liquefied natural gas flows every single day, had been effectively closed. Oil prices surged past $126 a barrel. Shipping insurers pulled back. Tankers stopped moving. The International Energy Agency issued a statement calling this the greatest energy security threat in recorded history, more consequential than the oil shocks of the 1970s combined. And the war was not yet 2 weeks old. In the weeks that followed, U.S. Central Command conducted more than 9,000 combat flights and struck more than 9,000 Iranian targets, missile factories, naval vessels, ballistic missile sites, IRGC headquarters, drone manufacturing facilities. Iran struck back at American bases with waves of its own missiles. 13 U.S. service members have been confirmed killed. More than 300 have been wounded. Just 2 days ago, 15 American troops were wounded in an Iranian attack on Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia, with at least 5 in serious condition. The war has been simultaneously destroying Iran's military capacity and producing precisely the kind of sustained confrontation that makes diplomacy more difficult with every passing hour. It was in this context, a war already 1 month old, a strait already closed, oil already at shock prices, that Trump decided to try something other than bombs. On the Saturday of the 3rd week of the war, he issued what appeared to be an ultimatum. He posted on Truth Social that Iran had 48 hours to reopen the Strait of Hormuz to all vessels or face strikes on its power plants. And he used a word that rarely appears in the lexicon of formal geopolitics. He said the U.S. would obliterate them. The deadline was due to expire Monday evening Washington time. And then on Monday morning, something unexpected happened. Trump posted again. This time, he said that the United States and Iran had held very good and productive conversations over the previous 2 days, and that major points of agreement had been reached, including, he said, that Iran had agreed it would never have a nuclear weapon. He said he had ordered the Pentagon to hold off on any strikes for 5 days. Iran immediately denied that any talks had taken place. Iranian state television ran a banner that said Trump had retreated out of fear of Iran's response. The semi-official Fars news agency said the same. Iran's Defense Council had issued a warning that if American bombs fell on Iranian shores or islands, Tehran would mine every access route in the Persian Gulf. effectively threatening to shut off not just the strait but the entire body of water. The implication was that Trump had blinked. The markets did not wait for a verdict. Wall Street futures surged nearly 3% on Trump's Monday morning post. Brent crude fell more than 10% in a single session, dropping from its peak near $126 a barrel back toward $100. The financial world had been watching this standoff with growing terror and took any signal of de-escalation as permission to exhale. But what actually happened in those 2 days before Trump's extension? Who spoke to whom? What was said? The answer, based on what we know, is more complicated and more unsettling than either side's public narrative.
According to CBS News, a senior Iranian foreign ministry official acknowledged that Iran had received points from the U.S. through mediators and that they were being reviewed. Trump later told reporters that his son-in-law Jared Kushner and special envoy Steve Witkoff had conducted talks Sunday evening with a top person in Iran, but not Iran's supreme leader. The reason that caveat matters is significant. Khamenei was killed on the first day of the war. His successor has not been formally and publicly recognized. Iran's power structure is fractured, contested, and operating under conditions of sustained military attack. Nobody, not the U.S. government, not the intelligence community, not the foreign policy analysts tracking this conflict in real time, can say with certainty who in Tehran has the authority to make an irreversible decision. Trump said he was talking to the right people.
But whether the right people can deliver on any agreement they might make is a question that does not yet have an answer. Then came Thursday, March 26th. The 5-day pause was about to expire. Trump was in a cabinet meeting. He turned to Steve Witkoff in front of cameras and asked whether he could share a piece of news. Witkoff said he could. Trump then told the room that Iran had allowed 10 oil tankers to pass through the Strait of Hormuz under the Pakistani flag as what he described as a present, a gesture of good faith. 8 first, then 2 more to, as Trump put it, apologize for something they said. He announced he was extending the pause by 10 more days, this time to April 6th at 8 p.m. Eastern, citing the ongoing talks and describing progress as significant. The post on Truth Social read, "As per Iranian government request, please let this statement serve to represent that I am pausing the period of energy plant destruction." Pausing the period of energy plant destruction. Those are the actual words the President of the United States used. But the Wall Street Journal reported something that cut directly against Trump's framing. Unnamed mediators told the journal that Iran had made no such request, that Tehran had not asked for the extension, that the regime wanted the U.S. to substantially scale back its demands before it would even consider in-person talks. The gap between the two narratives, Trump's story of progress and Iran's story of defiance, is not just a public relations dispute. It is the central strategic ambiguity of this entire war, and it feeds directly into the question of what April 6th actually is. At the same time the extension was being announced, the U.S. had presented Iran with a formal 15-point peace proposal transmitted through Pakistan. The proposal was detailed, ambitious, and, depending on which side you ask, either serious or insulting. The U.S. demanded that Iran dismantle its 3 main nuclear facilities, Natanz, Isfahan, and Fordow. It demanded that all enriched uranium be transferred to the International Atomic Energy Agency. It demanded that Iran halt ballistic missile production, limit its remaining missile inventory, end financial support for all regional proxy groups, including Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis, and reopen the Strait of Hormuz. In exchange, the proposal offered full sanctions relief, removal of the UN's snapback mechanism, and American assistance with Iran's civilian nuclear program at Bushehr. The package, if accepted, would represent the most comprehensive strategic restructuring of Iran's military and geopolitical posture in the history of the Islamic Republic. Iran rejected it in under 24 hours. A high-ranking Iranian diplomatic source told Al Jazeera the proposal was extremely maximalist and unreasonable. Iran's state broadcaster quoted an unnamed official saying that Iran does not accept a ceasefire and would end the war when it decides to do so and when its own conditions are met. An Iranian military spokesperson went further, addressing the United States directly on state television. Have your internal conflicts reached the point where you are negotiating with yourselves? The one claiming to be a global superpower would have already gotten out of this mess if it could. Don't dress up your defeat as an agreement. Your era of empty promises has come to an end, and Iran issued its own 5 conditions for ending the war: a complete halt to all attacks and assassinations by the US and Israel, international guarantees that the war will not resume, reparations for war damages, an end to all operations against Hezbollah and Iran-backed militias in Iraq, and international recognition of Iran's sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz, meaning, in practical terms, that Iran would retain permanent control over the choke point that determines global oil prices. This is not a negotiating position. It is a set of demands designed to make negotiation impossible unless the United States is willing to accept a strategic outcome that is the equivalent of losing. The White House did not accept Iran's framing. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt told reporters that negotiations were productive. She added, with a precision that was clearly deliberate, President Trump does not bluff. He is prepared to unleash hell. But here is the thing about that statement. Trump has now issued the same threat 3 times. Each time, the deadline has moved. That pattern does not mean he will not act on April 6th. It means that Iran's calculus has shifted. Every extension is data. And the data tells Tehran that American threats, at least so far, have a certain elasticity, particularly when Iran responds with counter threats serious enough to freeze the markets and rattle allied governments across the Gulf. What would actually happen if the strikes went ahead on April 6th? The power plant scenario, examined in full, is significantly more dangerous than the headline suggests. Iran is a nation of 90 million people. Its power grid is the backbone of hospitals, water treatment facilities, food cold chains, and the industrial output that keeps a wartime economy running. Amnesty International and multiple international law scholars have assessed that attacking civilian power infrastructure at this scale would likely constitute a war crime under the Geneva Conventions, specifically a violation of the prohibition on attacks whose consequences are disproportionate to their military objective.
The International Atomic Energy Agency has separately warned that any strikes near nuclear facilities risk outcomes ranging from localized chemical hazard to radiological contamination of Persian Gulf waters, depending on which site is targeted and how. But the retaliation scenario is where the analysis becomes truly alarming. Iran's Defense Council issued a formal warning. If Iranian shores or islands are struck, Tehran will mine all access routes in the Persian Gulf. Not just the strait, all of it. U.S. intelligence assessments, according to CBS News, already show at least a dozen Iranian mines are present in the Strait of Hormuz. If Iran executes the mining campaign it has described, the Persian Gulf, from Kuwait to Oman, from Bahrain to the UAE, becomes impassable for commercial shipping. 5 nations whose populations depend on seawater desalination for between 70 and 95% of their drinking water would lose access to the energy sources that power those plants.
The logic chain is short, direct, and catastrophic. Strike power plants, knock out the grid, shut down desalination, remove drinking water from millions of people in some of the most arid conditions on Earth. This is why Israel's position in all of this is so revealing. Israeli officials, according to reporting from NPR, were caught by surprise when the US submitted its 15-point peace proposal. Israel was not consulted on its timing. More significantly, Israeli military commanders are actively accelerating their targeting of Iranian arms factories, trying to destroy as many as possible before any ceasefire can be declared. Netanyahu has publicly stated that Israel will continue striking Iran and Lebanon regardless of where U.S. diplomacy goes. One Israeli official told reporters that while Israel would be notified in advance of any agreement, it would have little influence over the final content.
Privately, 2 Israeli military officials told NPR they are hoping for weeks more of war. That is not a government racing for an exit. That is a government that believes the war is working, and that April 6th is not a deadline to fear, but an opportunity to exploit. And then on March 28th, yesterday, the Houthis entered the war for the first time in 30 days. They fired ballistic missiles at Beersheba. Israel intercepted them.
But the signal was unmistakable. The Houthis have now publicly committed to continuing operations until strikes on Iran and its proxy groups stop. The Houthis, it should be remembered, disrupted over 100 merchant vessels in the Red Sea between late 2023 and early 2025.
Their re-entry into this conflict means that the world is now staring at the possibility of two simultaneous choke point crises: the Strait of Hormuz and the Red Sea, at the same moment that oil prices are already at multi-year highs and global shipping insurance has essentially evacuated from both waterways. So what does April 6th actually represent? It is one of three things. Either it is the moment Trump follows through on his most specific, most public, most repeatedly stated threat, in which case the retaliation it triggers will likely escalate the war into its most destructive phase. Or it is the moment Trump backs down for the third time and extends the deadline again, in which case Iran will draw the conclusion that threats from this White House have a price ceiling and they have found it. Or something else happens. A partial agreement, a face-saving gesture from both sides, a quiet arrangement transmitted through Pakistani diplomats that neither government is willing to claim publicly because the domestic political cost of calling it a deal is too high for both of them. The honest answer is that nobody knows which of those three outcomes is coming. But here is what we do know. The 15-point proposal has been rejected. Iran's 5 conditions are unacceptable to Washington. The Houthis are now active. American service members are being wounded in Saudi Arabia. The energy market is in a fragile, negotiated pause that could collapse in hours if the wrong decision is made on either side. And Netanyahu is in Lebanon, accelerating operations. Every variable in this equation is pointed in the direction of more war, not less. The question is only whether April 6th is the date that fact becomes undeniable. When this war began, most serious analysts expected it to last 4 to 6 weeks. Trump said as much publicly. We are now at day 29. If the conflict continues past April 6th, whether through strikes or extensions, it will begin operating in a time horizon where the economic damage may no longer be reversible by military outcome alone. The IEA's warning about mid-April as an inflection point for irreversible supply disruption is not abstract. Oil executives have given the same timeline. The Dallas Federal Reserve's modeling shows every additional week of closure adds compounding damage to global GDP. The Middle East runs on desalinated water. It runs on exported oil. Both of those systems are now under simultaneous pressure from a war that began 30 days ago and has no clear termination point. Here is the deeper truth about April 6th that almost nobody is saying directly. The deadline is less important than the pattern it represents. Trump has discovered that Iran can absorb military punishment at a scale no one fully predicted. Iran has discovered that its counter threats are potent enough to freeze the most powerful military on Earth, at least temporarily. Neither side has the ability to fully win on the timeline they originally planned, and both sides are now in a negotiation where the public positions are so far apart that any actual deal will require one or both governments to tell their domestic audiences something that is not entirely true. That is the diplomatic problem underneath the military problem. And it is why April 6th may not end the question. It may only change the shape of it. The world will be watching at 8 p.m. Eastern on April 6th. So will every oil market, every shipping company, every Gulf government, and every American household that has noticed what this conflict has done to energy prices. The Strait has been closed for nearly a month. The Houthis just entered the war. American troops are bleeding. Iran's power grid is the next stated target. And the man with the authority to order the strikes is the same man who has moved his own deadline twice already. What he decides in the next 8 days will not just define the next chapter of this war. It will define what comes after it, and whether the world has to pay for this conflict's consequences for months or for years.